So the theme of serendipity was chosen by our Russian chapter. Funny story. So after our last event in April where Don Reed spoke, we hadn't lined up our speaker just yet, and I was running some errands, and I saw this car pulled up in front of me, right in front of, as I was pulling out of Michael's, and I was heading to Best Buy. And I was like, here's for close-up. Oh, literally, and I was like, oh my God, we need a speaker. So they pulled into the Best Buy parking lot right before me, and I was like, is this meant to be? Is this? So, and then I followed this woman into the store, and I was like, creepily, hey. And I was like, are you a speaker? And she was like, what? And then I was like, I like your license plate, and ran away. So she was not our speaker, unfortunately. But luckily, as we were stressing out and trying to figure out who our speaker might be, one of our volunteers was actually, I know this great person who is running experiments specifically on how to create a serendipity. And that speaker is Cathy Deng. So please give a warm welcome to Cathy here.
Hi, everyone. How's it going? I'm really excited to be here, and I'm here to talk to you about serendipity. So to kind of set the stage, I want to talk a little bit about networks. So if you haven't heard of network science before, it's kind of like a new way of looking at communities. Instead of looking at attributes of people hey, average age or height or something like that. With network science, you kind of look at the structure of communities and how people are connected to each other. So this is a network diagram, and each of these little dots are people, and a link is a relationship between people. And when I was in college, I worked at this network science lab, and we did some pretty interesting research. One of the pilot studies that I worked on was studying diversity and academia. So what we looked at was a bunch of academics and how interesting their ideas were based on whether they were able to get grant funding. And one of our early findings was that teams of people that were more diverse, people coming from a bunch of different academic backgrounds coming together, they tended to do a lot better. And I think that's really cool because now there's a lot more research kind of backing this idea that it's diversity kind of spurs innovation, having people from a bunch of different backgrounds, it really accelerates new ideas. I want to spend some time talking about intersections, so kind of all of my interests end up being interdisciplinary, and it's because I've kind of taken these lessons from network science to heart. I'm a technologist, I build things, but I'm actually super bored by technology, and all of my favorite parts of technology are the more human aspects. How does this affect people? Who is using it? What's the ultimate impact of a tech project? I think intersections between a bunch of different fields kind of result in the most interesting tech projects. So I want to go through a couple examples. I really believe in showing over telling. Here's a cool project that I worked on when I was in Chicago. I moved here from Chicago. It's called Chicago's $1 Million Blocks. And who here has seen a crime map before? So usually when data people get their hands on crime data, they make a crime map where it's you go to Trulia and you see a heat map of crime, or you see a bunch of dots in crime. But we wanted to take a really different approach. This idea actually started in New York City at the Spatial Information Design Lab, and it's called $1 Million Blocks. And instead of mapping out crime, we get the addresses of people who have been sentenced, and we calculate how long they're sentenced for and get kind of a dollar amount out of that. So instead of looking at who's committing crime, this map is showing how much it costs to incarcerate people. And that kind of puts things in a really different framing, because instead of looking at crime and thinking oh, this is a thing to be suppressed or a thing to be squashed, it prompts people to think about what are other ways to spend this money. And where the name comes from, $1 Million Blocks, is that there are a bunch of blocks in Chicago where over $1 million has been spent to incarcerate people. So like, what if that money was put towards education or, other things? So I really like this project because it's an intersection of a bunch of different things. It takes the approach of, activists who want to tell a story, but we do it through data. Here's another project that I think is a really cool mix of stuff. I only touched this very lightly, but I want to talk about it because I love it so much. This was another project that Data made, my previous company. This is called Chicago's Large Lots. In a bunch of neighborhoods in Chicago, there are a ton of vacant lots. And these vacant lots are owned by the city. And they're kind of just like, there's a lot of trash, there are weeds. And the city wanted to find a way to kind of return these lots to people in the communities who are already kind of like doing their own upkeep without owning the land. So there was this really cool program to sell these lots back to people in the neighborhoods for $1. But unfortunately, like the first time the program launched, it was like really confusing to figure out like what lots were available, and like the process to apply for a lot was like really confusing and difficult. So we built a website that straight up is just like you enter your address to see like the lots near you that you're eligible to buy, and then it has like a web form. So you can like fill out a web form to buy a lot. And I think this is such a cool example because it shows how policy can't be like divorced from technology. Like the design and implementation of things matter so much. And then this is another project I worked on that is an intersection of my interests. It's a website called arementalkingtoomuch.com. You can go to it, and it's really simple. It's just 2 buttons, that time, who's talking. And this project kind of came from going to tech meetups and kind of noticing that like even at tech meetups when like the ratio of people in the room is like not that bad, still like the people who are talking are like mostly men. And of course, being at tech meetups, people are very like data savvy. So I was like, how can I use that to make a statement? So yeah, this project encourages what I call artisanal, hand-gathered data, small batch data. And I really like this project because it's essentially like I could have written a blog post about this, but this is just like another form of making a statement that is maybe more compelling than writing a blog post because people can actually, get results and see it. So now I want to talk a little bit about some more like philosophical stuff about personalization. So nowadays, there are like a lot of forces around us trying to like personalize everything. Like Facebook is trying to figure out all your interests so that they can sell you ads. You go on Amazon, and Amazon is trying to recommend you products similar to what you have bought in the past. If you like go on Twitter, they try to recommend that you follow people, and the people that they recommend are all like, people who are similar to people you already follow. So there are all these forces around us that kind of assume that what we want and what we should have is like more of the same. And I think that's actually like a really crappy assumption to make. And I've been thinking about this a lot and thinking about like how can we engineer things to kind of push people in the opposite direction? How can we engineer serendipity? So I'm currently at the Buzzfeed Open Lab in San Francisco, and it's kind of like this experimental R&D-esque lab within BuzzFeed. And I'm there for a 1-year fellowship. And the focus of my fellowship is how to break people out of their bubbles. Of course, when I say like popping bubbles, right now the first thing people jump to is kind of like political divides. There are a lot of projects that are like, let's find a liberal person and like pit them against a conservative person and have them fight. And that's kind of like not the approach I'm going for. Trying to find someone who's most different from you, or like find things that are most different from what you already have, I think that's actually like a form of personalization in itself, because it's still like defining another person by their relationship to you. So my approach to popping bubbles is like straight up randomness and serendipity. So here's a project I worked on. It's a browser extension that works on Facebook, and it's called Noisify. And what it does, you can go to the Chrome Web Store and download it. It nudges you to search for random stuff in your Facebook search bar. And I think this is kind of fun, because on Facebook, the really creepy thing about Facebook is that they're not just looking at like the stuff you intentionally post. You know, they're not just like looking at your status updates and your likes. They're also looking at your behavior. You know, all these little data trails that you leave, like what you're clicking on, who you're searching for, like all of that is stuff that they use to piece together your identity. So if you're leaving a bunch of breadcrumbs like every time you're using Facebook, why not just like kind of leave breadcrumbs that are slightly harder to follow? So yeah, use this, click on some random people. And also I think the really delightful thing about this is like sometimes you come across this like totally random stuff. Like I was just using this yesterday and like learned about a new city in Somalia that I've never heard of. So yeah, it's a fun way to just like find totally random stuff on Facebook. This is another project I worked on in collaboration with a BuzzFeed podcast called See Something, Say Something. It's a podcast about Muslim identity in America. This was after like the travel ban business. We put up a hotline that collected stories from people about feeling belonging or feeling that they don't belong in America. And the thing with this hotline is it's not just collecting stories. You can call in and you can also listen. And my thinking behind this is that like the people that you hear directly from, you know, it's usually like friends and family and like people who are like pretty similar to you and close to you. And then people who are really different from you, you never like hear directly from them. You know, you'll maybe like hear about them. That's a thing that happens much more often. So I wanted to build something where you can like hear directly from strangers. So yeah, if you call this, you'll hear a totally random story from someone. And then here's another example of a project. I just released this last week, and I encourage you to text it right now if you want to pull out your phones. You can text serendipity to this phone number, and it's a music swap. What happens is it'll ask you for a song recommendation, and then you give a song recommendation, and then it gives you a song recommendation from a total stranger. So far, this is mostly people in the Creative Mornings community. It'll pass your recommendation onwards to people who text in the future, and like when that happens, you'll get a text saying like, hey, somebody just saw your music recommendation. And I really wanted to do something like this because music is something that's very personal, but it's not something like confrontational, but it still has like a lot of emotional valence. I want to talk a little bit about why I love serendipity so much. So in a lot of networks, there's something that happens organically called the rich get richer effect. And like if we take music as an example, when people share music, you know, there's some really popular music. And because it's popular, more people know about it. And because more people know about it, more people share it. And because more people share it, it gets more popular. So there's kind of like this exponential effect where like things that are already popular get really popular, and it's kind of hard to break out of that. And there aren't really a lot of things that are kind of like fighting against this natural tendency in networks. So you'll notice if you text the number, it doesn't ask for like, hey, what's your favorite song? It asks for what's a song that you wish more people knew about. And I think using serendipity and randomness is a way to kind of like, you know, nudge the world in the opposite direction to kind of fight this rich get richer. I think if you seek the interdisciplinary, if you like kind of sit at the intersection of a lot of different worlds, that's a really good place to be because that's where cross-pollination happens, and that's where a lot of like new serendipitous ideas can come up. And then also embrace pure randomness. Thanks, everyone.